Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Ron.
I'm Lindsey.
I'm Jay.
And this is our review of An American Werewolf in London, starring David Naughton, Jenny Agutter, Griffin Dunn, and John Woodvine. Written and directed by John Landis. Released in 1981 on a $5.8 million budget, it grossed over $62 million at the box office and achieved critical acclaim. It was also one of Michael Jackson's favorite movies, which is why John Landis did the Thriller video.
Yeah.
But besides that, why are we talking about this?
I think that's my fault because, as I mentioned on the Wolf of Snow Lake review, werewolves are like a big hole in my cinematic viewing experience. In fact, there's only been one previous werewolf movie in the Film Strip lexicon, and that was Silver Bullet. You go all the way back to like episode 57 or something like that. And then I haven't seen a lot of werewolf movies. In fact, I'll tell you both now, I didn't see this until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Finally, I'd seen clips of it in like Terror in the Isles and stuff. I felt like I knew it just from pop culture or whatever, but I never watched it. And I'd seen The Howling and most of The Howling too, I think. And, I just haven't seen a lot of werewolf movies. So I think, Ron, we were talking about it even back then. And I said, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and watch this. It was on Prime or something. And I watched it. And I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I get what everybody was, talking about for all these years. And, 5 or 6 years later, it finally pops up on the show. So that's how it goes.
Yeah. See previous episode, Wolf of Snow Hollow, for basically the genesis of this particular podcast. Lindsey, what's your background with American Werewolf in London?
I saw it for the first time this morning for this podcast. Yeah, I'd never seen it before.
Wow.
And I guess werewolves are kind of a hole in my viewing repertoire. I've seen Monster Squad, which has a werewolf in it, and Harry Potter famously has a werewolf in it, but that's about it. So this was my first ever viewing. I was watching it fresh.
Now, you don't see the Wolfman's Nards in Monster Squad.
You don't.
But you can kind of see the Wolfman's Nards at several points in this movie, except not when he's in his werewolf form. But
yeah, no, more of just a giant bush, circa 70s style, I guess, as was that era. I don't know.
Early 80s, yeah.
It is 1981, and as Jay and I discussed many times on our Friday the 13th series, which is also available in the Film Strip archives, the 70s lasted until about 1986.
That feels right. Yeah.
I could not tell you the first time I watched this movie because it was that long ago. I've watched it dozens of times. It contains some of my favorite special effects work of all time. And I will go to bat for Rick Baker and anything he's ever done because this is absolutely phenomenal work on his part. And watching it fresh for the podcast, I was struck again by just how painful it looks. And I know that's kind of jumping ahead. We'll get to that at some point, but I'm a longtime fan of this movie. I'm a longtime fan of werewolves as monsters. I'm a longtime fan of werewolf movies in general. One of my formative experiences was watching the Fox werewolf show, the Fox Network werewolf show that came on in like 92 or 91. It was one of the first things I remember them specifically showing on Fox. I watched the first 5 seasons or so of the Teen Wolf MTV show. I have a long time interest in lycanthropes, probably because of this movie and because of The Howling. But
yeah, I always forget Teen Wolf. Like, I never mention that when I'm talking about werewolf movies. I've seen that as much as I've seen anything Michael J. Fox did, outside of Back to the Future. I just never think of that as a werewolf movie because it's so many other things, I think, and it's so light touch with the Wolfie. Go wolf yourself. I think I remember that. And I don't know, the girl in the theater and him in his little Civil War suit. I don't even know what they were doing. It was crazy, but yeah, I know that one. But as far as like werewolves as a scary thing, I have seen the Wolfman Universal Monster, of course, and that's kind of horror homework for somebody like me, but it didn't make a huge impression. And then I remember when Benicio del Toro remade that sort of several years ago, and I just thought, well, he already looks like a half wolf anyway, and I didn't see it. And then there's a Jack Nicholson wolf movie, and I was like, no, we're not doing that. So it's one of those things I haven't experienced a lot of, but again, I feel like I knew this movie from its reputation and that transformation scene. Again, that was in like a Terror in the Isles or one of those clips things, and it's iconic. I mean, I think everybody knows that. And then you mentioned Rick Baker. I mean, he won the very first makeup special effect Academy Award, and it's amazing that it took that long to get one. But he basically built the category for him because this was so amazing.
Still waiting on that stuntman Oscar, but maybe before too long it'll happen.
Oh no, we can just nominate 10 films nobody's seen still, but yeah, sure.
But no, I would be interested in rewatching Wolf at some point, the Jack Nicholson movie you're talking about, if only because Jack Nicholson pees on a guy. Which that's probably not something that he hasn't done in real life as well. So
who's to say at this point? So,
but in movies that do feature some peeing, but not peeing on anyone, Jay, would you mind giving us the plot summary for American Werewolf in London?
I will try. I will give you this is actually my memories of this as an hour before recording. I just sat down and said, okay, let me see what I can pull together. So you guys will have to tell me if I missed stuff. So super rich boy New Yorkers David and Jack are backpacking through Yorkshire when they come upon a pub, the Slaughtered Lamb, where they are warned to stay on the roads and away from the moors as they leave. They ignore this, of course, as good idiot American tourists do, and they're attacked by a large creature that mauls and kills Jack while injuring David. David wakes up in the hospital 3 weeks later, confused as to what happened. He's haunted by strange, violent dreams. We're going to talk about the Nazi werewolf machine gunners at some point. He's also visited by the rotting corpse wishes of Jack, who tells him that they were attacked by a werewolf and that Jack's soul is caught in limbo until the beast's lineage is wiped out, meaning David needs to kill himself. Alex, a nurse who provides care for David, invites him to stay with her upon his release from the hospital, and the two begin a passionate love affair. David is still haunted by those dreams, and when the full moon comes, he transforms into a werewolf and goes on a killing spree. The next day, he has no memory of what happened, but later realizes he is indeed a werewolf and will kill again. He's unable to kill himself, though, and runs away from Alex, taking refuge in a seedy theater. Meanwhile, Dr. Hirsch from the hospital has gone to the pub the guys visited and become convinced of the werewolf threat. And Alex confesses that she's been with David, and the two race to the theater at Piccadilly Circus. But in spite of one more visit from his ghastly, ghostly victims, David's unable to kill himself in time and transforms, killing several patrons in the theater. And then the David werewolf bolts from the theater, kills a police officer, causes a huge car pileup that results in many deaths, mauls his way through the crowd as the police give chase. And Alex finally makes her way past authorities and finds David, the werewolf, crouched in a dark alley. And she declares her love for him as authorities shoot the beast, who transforms back into the dead David, and credits roll right into the Marcel's Blue Moon. And that's what I remembered of American Werewolf in London.
I can't think of anything you missed. I think you got a lot of it.
Yep. I think you covered it.
I think the thing about this is that it is pretty simple and it's economical. And I accredit that to the fact that it was written in 1969 by our director here, John Landis, while he was working on Kelly's Heroes. He scratched this thing out, had it sitting there, and it sat on a shelf for a long time. And if you think about the way movies were made in the 60s, particularly cheap horror movies, like there's not a lot to them. Like they're pretty simple. And this one's pretty simple too. Like if you were to, go through and you could trim out some things that are probably, more updated when he got around to actually making the thing, you could have an hour-long movie when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I believe I Was a Teenage Werewolf is like an hour and 10 minutes or something, an hour and 20 minutes, which is another one of my favorite movies. But yeah, I agree there. Yeah, I love that. The backstory to this movie is fascinating to me because I forgot John Landis was involved with Kelly's Heroes.
Yeah, been around a long time, before he, became a thing. And, of course, everybody knows the notoriety and notoriousness he, came to in his career, but he's had a long career, and you're seeing him at the beginning of it. And we did a Landis flick last year when we did Blues Brothers, and we talked about that. And this one, I think, has a lot, or owes a lot, to Blues Brothers. And apparently the way he got the permit to shoot in Piccadilly Circus was he screened the Blues Brothers movie for like all the cops in that side of London or something one night. Like, that's how he bribed them to let him do it, and so they all got to see like an advanced copy or something like that.
That's cool.
Yeah. Like I say, it's a pretty economical script, and I think the lasting part of this, if there's anything, it's the blend of the horror and the comedy. And we talked a little bit about that on Wolf of Snow Hollow, but I don't know, Lindsey, I think the problem sometimes with horror comedies is that they just tend to be comedies that have a lot of blood in them. There's really no good scare. And this one does, in my opinion, does a good job of balancing the two things.
I agree. It was lighthearted enough and just scary enough to strike the balance just right. I also really appreciated the length. I know we were just talking about it being economical. After watching so many, I feel like recently every movie I've watched is at least 2.5 hours long. So to see that this movie was only an hour and a half or so, I was just like, yes, excellent. Fantastic.
I think you texted me that said that you had been in the midst of watching a bunch of like music biopics or whatever.
Yeah, I did. I did do that. And then I ended up watching Cruella on Disney Plus for the first time. I hadn't seen that. Something, just side note, probably one of the best origin stories I've seen in a really long time. Yeah, I thought they struck a good balance there with the comedy and the horror.
And I think a lot of the comedy is at the feet of Griffin Dunne, who I have, you've seen him act for years and years and years at this point. And the guy is just, he has such a presence. And I'll give Landis a lot of credit because in the background stuff that I read, he told Griffin Dunne, when you come back as the, mauled ghost thing or whatever, I don't want you to be angry. I want you to be as like chipper and calm and cool as you tell your best friend to kill himself. And that is so disarming.
That was so well done. That scene in the Smutty Theater where they're all introducing themselves as the people that he's killed as a werewolf. Yeah. That whole scene is just it's spot on. It's just the right amount of hilarious.
Yeah, Griffin Dunne really has great comic timing, and it's really interesting how well Griffin Dunne and David Naughton specifically play off of each other in a way that I really find appealing. And they establish it really early on in the movie that these guys are like longtime friends. They're really close, and they've got a really they have really funny relationships with each other. I think they have a lot of fun back and forth, inside joke almost kind of things, which is something that comes a lot in the script, I'm sure, but that also comes a lot from the interplay that the two actors have. And I think that the movie with those two characters, and specifically David Naughton and Griffin Dunne, I think that is a much better choice than who the studio wanted for this movie, which was Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi.
Ooh.
Really?
That would have been a very different.
It would have been, yeah. That's an entirely different movie that we're talking about.
That's the Blues Brothers meet the werewolf. That's what that is.
Which also would have been good, I'm sure, but it would have been different.
Aykroyd was supposed to play David, and Jack was supposed to be, of course, Belushi.
Right.
Which feels right to me, but honestly, I think that would have been a real distraction from the movie to have those two.
Yeah.
Especially at this point, Belushi's pretty far into his coke days.
Yeah. And I mean, and they were so well known at that point. Like David Naughton and Griffin Dunne, you mentioned this one, nobody knew who Griffin Dunne was. He went on to have this incredible career. David Naughton had a career. It was a different one. I think he's mostly known for this, and that's, fine. He didn't seem to, mind it, but they were new, they were fresh, but they looked like what we tried to pass off as young 20 somethings. Landis constantly refers to them as the boys, and it's, I mean, there's so much heavy handedness in this movie sometimes, though, that like it could, in the hands of a less skilled director and less good actors, that's bad grammar, but of people that aren't giving this what it has, the fact that the two guys who end up incredibly dead at the end of the movie show up in a trunk full of sheep to a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb in the opening scene. I mean, geez, like that kind of thing usually is like, I'm going to beat that, because it's dumb, but it plays off well. And I've never traveled to the UK. The two of you have. So how replicable was the experience of the Slaughtered Lamb from what things y'all have experienced?
I found a few things in my experience to be pretty spot on. One, the Slaughtered Lamb, the little sign hanging right outside the pub, is super common. All the pubs have those signs. They're not always as, vulgar or bloody, but it's usually some kind of animal like the red wolf or the white stag or, something like that. It's accurate that they do not serve food, a lot of them.
Right.
And I can tell you it took me probably 2.5, 3 days in England before I finally figured out where to acquire something to eat on a semi-regular basis. I was like, when is dinner here? That was the weirdest culture shock for me, because I just assumed like, you're in a city, they have food. And I was thinking a pub like you'd get here stateside. And no, they don't really have food there. They do at certain times of day, but it's usually the ones I went to anyway, pretty specific. Otherwise, you're just going and drinking. And it's a bunch of regulars who go there all the time. And you are not one of them. They weren't rude, to be fair. Like it's never like a rude situation, but you definitely feel out of place. I did, but I think I just generally feel out of place all the time, everywhere anyway. So that might just be me.
No, I felt pretty out of place where I was, and I tended to hit a lot more. I tended to hit a lot more touristy spots or infamous spots, because we did a East London Jack the Ripper tour, and I went to the Seven Bells or whatever it was, the pub where like his last victim was drinking before she was murdered, where they think he was there. And, and when we went to Canterbury, and we went up to Scotland, and Scotland, the place where we stayed in Scotland in Stirling was this place called the Portcullis. It used to be a school in like the 1700s or something. And it was this beautiful old building that had a view of Stirling Castle in the background, and then downstairs was the pub, and the pub felt a ton like the Slaughtered Lamb, like a nicer version of the Slaughtered Lamb, in the sense that it's a bunch of locals and like the 10 people who were staying at the hotel maybe, and you walk down there and you I felt like I was in another world, not let alone another country.
All right, so it sounds like y'all had similar experience. Lindsey, you alluded to it. Ron, you did a little bit too. I think it's interesting how they walk in and they're obviously not from there. And it's, very clear that they're not wanted there either. And all it took was just asking about the giant pentagram on the wall to screw up the guy's dart game. And it was on at that point. I got a kick out of that. I'm laughing at this though, because like I said, the balance of the horror and the comedy here is really well done, and that's not an easy thing to achieve.
And it's funny because when the bald guy jumps up and starts telling his story about his joke about the plane going to the United Nations, when I was in Stirling, we had one of the most interesting / most racist conversations that I've ever had with someone in a bar. Because he was like a little nice guy, a little short guy, bought me a beer, so I'm going to talk to him. He was like, "From America?" I was like, "Yep." Because I had a big beard like I do now, and I had it then. And he was like, "From America? What part?" And I was like, "Oh, Kentucky." And he was like, "Oh, I used to ride racehorses," because he was like 5 foot tall. And he was like, "I rode some racehorses on the circuit here, Kentucky Derby, Kentucky Fried Chicken, all that stuff." I was like, "Yeah, all that stuff." And then somebody's like, and somehow he gets around to, there's a lot of black people in America, right? I was like, kind of, I guess, compared to Scotland. He was like, yeah, we don't have any, like, there's no minorities in this part of Scotland. It's just like all white people and then like 3 Asians who run the chip shop or whatever. So he's asking me all these questions about what it's like to be like around black people. And it was the weirdest conversation I've ever had. It's like, I don't know, man, they're just like us, you know, they're just like anybody else. You know, there's nothing that they're all sorts of people, you know, black, white, and other. And it was just, he was fascinated by the thought that like I live in a town that's like racially mixed. It was the
right, yeah. That idea is completely, backward. But no, I did get a kick out of all the bar patrons though, because again, they're there, and the old barmaid lady, like she stopped short of like, no boys, don't go, you know, because she knows like if you send them out into that, man, like you're sending them to death, you know. But I love the ominous part of that, because again, this movie is fleet. It doesn't waste any time of getting us right into the action, as it were, because as I said in the plot summary, these you guys completely ignore the one thing there. You know, it's like Billy and Gremlins, like, you know, it does everything wrong, and they're going to both do what they want to do. Like
you said at the beginning, Jay, efficient. It's a very efficient film.
So what'd you make of the initial attack of the first werewolf guy, who I just called, I don't know who, you know, if he had a character's name or whatever, I was like, this is the lead singer from Radiohead is what he looks like after they shot him, you know. And I was like, okay, it's Tom York attacks and murders him. I was, for a movie that is 41 years old at the time that we're doing this podcast, the way that those effects still hold up, I credit not only to Rick Baker, but I think to the way John Landis cuts this movie and the way that it works is that you don't see it for too long and it's just enough. It's like the shark in Jaws.
Yeah, I think there's only one point where it lingers on not necessarily the gore, but the makeup for just a little too long, but it didn't take me out of it. That was when the first, when his friend shows up and his first ghostly appearance, I guess you could say, before he's totally rotting.
Yeah.
And that, when I first saw it, my first thought was, that is an amazing makeup job. That's fantastic. And then there was just a little bit too much of a close up, and you could see the prosthetic kind of where that met his face. But honestly, it was still fantastic work. So many intestines, with every attack, there were a lot of intestines going on there.
There's lots of disemboweling. I guess the werewolves have to eat. Like, that's a thing. So.
Yeah.
And this is one of those movies that I think the transition to digital, to specifically to high def, allows you to see a little bit more than you used to be able to see. Because I never remember seeing the seams on the makeup, but you're right. You can kind of see just a little bit up where it meets his face.
Yeah, just on his cheek. Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like watching Star Trek, the original. You can see it all on their face, you know.
But in all fairness, it was toward the end of that scene when that started to kind of. So he'd probably been wearing it and talking with it and filming with it on for hours at that point. So really, I mean, still a great job, great makeup job.
Yeah, it still looks good, and the fact that 41 years later, in high def. The only thing we could point to is like one slight seam. You can see, like,
yeah,
at the very end of the scene, it's really impressive. Man, it's really shiny and it's really slimy.
Yeah, it's just so
slimy.
Gross. Everything's just, I mean, he's clawed apart. But it's what you would expect would happen from a wolf attack or a large clawed teethed creature. You know, what it would do to you if it got a hold of you. I mean, it rips Jack limb from limb, basically. And, you know, David gets the cut on gets the scratch in the face. I think he's cut on the arm or something, or bitten on the arm or whatever. And
no, he's got claw furrows down his chest. We see it later in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
He spent 3
and that's
weeks in the
scabbing.
hospital. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That scab work on the claw marks on his chest, I was also super impressive. Like, that looks really real. That was the makeup and the special effects in this movie were great, much better than I expected as a first time viewer.
Yeah, I mean I think if people know that about this movie, they know the effects and from it. But I think I go back to what we were talking about, Lindsey, too. Griffin Dunn is so good at just being sort of the little evil Jiminy Cricket, like, well, it's time to die now. I mean, he's just like, you got to kill yourself, Dave. It's the only way. He's just so funny. And it's so just the deadpan way he delivers it is great. And I got a kick out of that. I got a kick out of the Frank Oz, who, you talk about lines of coke. I don't know if he did rails or not, man, but he was straight Fozzie Bear in that scene where you're yelling at that guy in the hospital, and you've got all the nurses hovering around all this, and it's just chaos there. And that's the mark of a big comedy. That we talked about that in Blues Brothers, that there was just chaos happening around Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi most of the time, and that's what made it funny, is they're just sort of straight through it, and David's sort of that too. He's reacting to all of it, but he's not going too big himself.
And they did have, so those detectives, when they came in the doctor's office, I think there were some very like Pink Panther moments when he drops all those bowls and he's trying to put them back together. Yes. And I think those detectives, every time they showed up on screen, it was just a mini Pink Panther vignette is what it felt like, which also kind of added a nice little layer of comedy.
That's a great pull. I did not think Pink Panther, but you say that, and I can totally get that. That's fantastic.
Those two detectives, I'll give you a clean take. Those two detectives were a really funny pairing, and it reminds me a lot of, if you ever watch any like cozy mysteries, whenever there's like cops that show up and interfere with our cozy mystery heroine or hero, or like Midsummer Murders, there's always like one kind of straight-laced, got it together cop, and there's always like the young kind of goofy-ish partner type. And this feels like something that has permeated pop culture, or was always a part of pop culture, that has just come further and further into the forefront.
I think Bryan Johnson is a huge fan of all of that you just mentioned, and of this movie, because Knives Out is replete with that. With Daniel Craig and all the other actors in that. But I think of David Suchet and all those, the times when in college I dated somebody that watched a lot of British television, so therefore I did as well, and so I got to see a lot of that stuff. And because I only knew David Suchet as the evil dictator pilot guy in Iron Eagle for years, which my girlfriend at the time was abhorred by. I think you're right. I mean, that it's a trope that would seem familiar to everyone at the time, and then it gets repeated and repeated over. And it's also why this works, is because you still see that today, right? And like Lindsey pointed out with the Pink Panther stuff, like you can immediately feel like there's a Clouseau, Blake Edwards, riff going on through this, because we got to have like light moments in between this horrific violence. Because if there's one thing I'll say about some of the werewolf movies I've seen or that I know exist, the thing that turned me off to the idea of them was they just take themselves too seriously. And it's like, you got to be able to balance the fun with this. And, it's an old monster movie. I mean, in 1980, the studio didn't know what this was. Slasher movies hadn't really made it yet. I mean, there's only 2 at that point, and there were 3 if you really want to think about it. And so they hadn't figured out, how to crank those out where they were money-making machines. So this was a real gamble. And to throw that much money on this thing, man, $6 million for this movie, like that's a lot of dough. Like I was surprised that they spent that much on this, but Landis had pulled in hits, man. That Blues Brothers money went a long way. So
yeah, and more importantly than that, like at this point of his career, he had been a proven like hit maker, because Kentucky Fried Movie was a big hit, and his first movie was actually a movie he made in 1971 called Schlock, which is like a caveman movie that he uses a lot of the techniques that you see in this movie that are more refined. He uses a lot of similar stuff to shoot around himself playing the caveman Schlock in Schlock. So it's pretty fun to watch. You kind of watch his growth as a filmmaker, but also see that sense of, because, Kentucky Fried Movie is just a bunch of vignettes strung together with like a very thin connective tissue. This has much stronger connective tissue, but it's also very much feels like a vignette movie because you've got little sections that feel self-contained, and then David Naughton wakes up in Jenny Aguter's bed and with no memory of how he got there or what he did.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about him in the hospital and sort of, he gets visited by Jack, and we've done that and talked about that scene. And then he has those nightmares afterward. And there's the one where Alex, the nurse, wakes him up and he's got that face. And for years, y'all, I thought that face, that visage thing, when it's almost like a vampire thing. I thought that was out of like Salem's Lot or something. Like I didn't remember that was part of this movie. So you have that dream, and then you have the Nazi werewolf machine gun dream too. Like, what in the hell is that? I got questions. Like, what? That one's the one that I don't get. I don't know. His whole family gets wiped out.
Those are like goblins or
mutants or something.
Yeah, they're like orcs.
Orcs is good.
Orcs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, why is he dreaming of Nazi orcs shooting his family up in New York? That's what I want to know.
Why do you dream about anything? I feel like that's kind of just...
Well, it depends. On the couch and we talk. I don't know.
I don't know. I just took it as this is just a bizarre dream. And it was, very dreamlike because they don't always make sense, or, they're not always streamlined. But maybe it was just a poorly executed scene. I don't know. I just kind of took it at face value, like, oh, it's just a weird dream. We've all had those.
I don't think it was poorly executed at all. I feel like it was really well executed for what it's supposed to be, which is this is him. To me, I've always read it as this is his brain being changed by the lycanthropy infection and his body starting to get to the change where he's going to become a werewolf. And the dreams seem to pick up the closer that they get to the full moon.
Mm-hmm.
I have a theory about it, and it goes along with some of what you both have said, but his whole family gets wiped out, and he's held at knife point and can't do anything about it, but he could if he wanted to, but he doesn't. So it's almost like I'm a person and I'm powerless when the wolf takes over, because these are sort of partial wolf things. And there's a subtext in this too, where he's clearly Jewish. His friend is Jewish. And so Nazis going in and attacking them. There's a fear sort of ingrained in that. And I think he's just having a nightmare that, he would have. And it's, along with what you're saying, his wolf brain is letting him know, like, when we're in charge, you're going to sit there like I got a knife to your throat. There's nothing you can do about it. And he's afraid he's going to wipe out everybody around him. And it's a completely batshit crazy dream in the middle of this thing, but it's striking as well, because they shoot everybody, but then they take time to, like, that bay window by the kitchen, F that, blow that away too. They just gun into apart. I don't know. I thought that was neat. Am I crazy? Do I need to lay on the couch a little longer and explore my dreams? I don't know.
No, I definitely get where you're going with that. And I feel like it has a lot to do with his lack of control and with just how destructive we see the wolf being, like specifically later on in the movie, especially towards the end, that just by its existence, it creates untold amounts of chaos in the lives of everyone around it, whether it intends to or not. And so I feel like that I feel like it's almost Landis and company foreshadowing, like, if you think this is crazy and this is just a lot of random destruction, just wait till we get to Piccadilly Circus.
I think too the way the dream sequences got closer together and the way they were cut together. So I had a friend tell me once that schizophrenia feels like you can't tell the difference between real life and dreaming. And as I was watching this whole sequence and all these dreams get closer and closer together and get closer and closer to David's reality, I was like, oh, this feels exactly like that explanation that I got one time, which makes sense because he's morphing into two totally different things at this
it's
point.
that Jekyll and Hyde mind thing going on and all that. So we got to talk about Alex though, and her whole thing here.
Her bad kissing self.
Well, there's that, and there's just I am yet to completely understand the motivation, and maybe it's I'm old and this is 2022 and I just cannot imagine a scenario like this. It's also because this would never happen to me. So I don't get how you nurse somebody back to health and you're like, I'm very attracted to you, David. Come live with me. Like just out of nowhere. Like it's a friggin' Lifetime movie all of a sudden. For 20
I'm pretty sure that's how my parents' meet cute went.
Really? Oh my gosh.
My mom was a nurse and my dad was injured, and that's how she met him.
Wow.
He was in the hospital.
Wow.
Yep.
Now,
Okay. Then.
is your dad a werewolf?
No. He was a Marine though, so
I mean,
Really similar. Yeah.
yeah.
He's got a
And very hairy. He's got a very, very hairy back, so he could be a werewolf.
About you tonight than we would have ever known. Oh my gosh.
Well, we always joke that the hair migrated from the top of his head down his back, and that's where it all is now.
He does live like far, far north. He needs good fur to stay.
Yeah, he does. He's in upstate New York, and he doesn't listen to this podcast. And even if he did, I think he'd laugh. So I feel very comfortable saying that on here.
Shout out to Lindsey's dad. But no,
it's funny because I was going to bring up a friend of mine who spent like a month in the hospital after having like open heart surgery. And when he got out of the hospital, he dated one of his nurses for like 6 months.
Wow.
So it's a thing that happens to good-looking people, Jay, not to.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, because I clearly know what the problem is. Also, I spent all of my time in a hospital when I was a kid, like a little kid, like 8, 9, 10 years old. So I don't go unless I absolutely have to. I can't tell you the last time I was in the hospital. I probably was in college, and it was some injury I sustained to myself. But it was, there was, even then when I had a lot of hair and was halfway cute, it didn't matter.
You mean in it, or have you don't go to visit either? Like if you know someone in it?
I've only been to visit a couple of family members. Like it's not a.
I think that's fair. There's a smell.
There's just a
very visceral. Yeah.
It's not a thing I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't go visit. The last time I spent any time in the hospital was second grade, and if any nurses were attracted to me then, they're probably in jail now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you didn't know. But so she takes him home, and we do get. I will say that like the sweetness of this movie is not lost on me, and the fact that they have like very realistic-ish love scenes going on here. Like it's not the typical thing you would see even in the 80s, but think into like the mid 80s through the 90s, what I call the sweet spot of the erotic thriller. Like some of that was just ridiculous, what would be going on. And this is, I don't know, it seemed very real. And I think that punctuated by the fact that the next morning after their first night together, she just walks in the room wearing his NYU t-shirt. Like a lesser movie, she just would have walked in, or a sitcom, she just walks in with that shirt and you kind of know. But I don't know. I thought it was well done. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to be weird or anything. I'm just saying like it was really very real, it felt like.
I feel like their whole relationship ended up feeling much realer for me than I'd expected from the beginning. The beginning feels a little bit kind of weird and strained, but also part of that is just because, there is clearly a culture clash between the two of them. And I feel like, David is a little weird and awkward anyway. Neither one of them seem to be the most successful with the women on this trip, or just in general from the tone of their conversation. But I think a lot of this is sold just by how like sweet Alex is, and how well Jenny Agutter puts across that, she's a fixer, but she's nice. And and as their relationship kind of grows in the movie, it feels a little bit more comfortable, a little more lived in to me.
It feels like a relationship that has matured, and they know each other well enough to be perfectly comfortable, which kind of makes sense because she's literally spoon-fed him.
Right.
Yeah, among other terrible things she's probably had to do.
Yes.
It's no shame at some point, right?
I mean, he does take a leak with the door open, so there's that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they're definitely a lived-in. I credit a lot of it to our actors too, just having good chemistry with one another and clearly having some fun and going with it. She has a neat turn because David says, he loves her long before in fact, she doesn't say it until the end of the movie when she's basically just getting him to calm down long enough to not kill her in that moment. And it's when he lunges when they shoot him. But there's something neat about that she clearly cares for him, but she's not going to say it first. And then this movie, goes completely off the rails because she's got to work and he's just hanging out, which I love how she just sort of apologizes about, oh, I'm sorry about my apartment. It's so terrible. I'm like, this place is awesome, lady. What are you talking about? Like,
Yes. I'm just a working girl. Don't expect much.
I was like, that's pretty good.
That's actually something, because Brian watched it with me this morning. That is something he commented on. He goes, man, she's saying, oh, hope you don't mind my apartment. And she continues to give him a tour of this apartment that's like twice the size of ours. Right. And I was like, yeah, it's a really nice place. Yeah, especially for London. Nobody lives in London like that. That's crazy.
Not anymore. Maybe you could in 1980,
right. That's true. I have to put this into context.
Even for then, that's still a pretty posh area of London. So like her shoebox would be something people would be paying like £5,000 a month for now. I know because it's not a shoebox. It's like that's a pre-war building. That's a nice building.
Oh no!
There's a living room and a kitchen and a bedroom.
She's got shelf space. She's got the dual icebox thing going on. I mean, no, I was impressed. But I mean, that's the thing is when he's left to his own devices, you see the transformation start to take place. And you've got CCR's Bad Moon Rising. We're going to put the needle drops in this movie, because it opens up with the Bobby Vinton kind of lounge act version of Blue Moon. It's just real subtle or whatever. And then you get CCR, and that, everybody knows that song, and it's banging. And he's like the sweat effects that they do on David Naughton in this movie where he's just like freaking out and he's talking about how hot he is. And when he starts stripping himself off, when that transformation happens, that is a striking scene, not only because of the effects, but he puts a lot into it.
There's something that confused me about the set dressing. And I don't know if either of you guys have thoughts on that. There were a lot of Disney tchotchkes in there. Did you notice that? They were like Mickey Mouse dolls all over the place. And I couldn't figure out why. Like maybe she just has a thing for America and that's why she was attracted to this American guy to begin with. That's the closest, but I couldn't, because they really honed in on Mickey Mouse quite a few times.
I think you hit it, Lindsay. I didn't notice that or think about it, but I think you nailed it. She's got a thing for Americans, and what if you don't have a McDonald's bag laying around? What else have you got in 1980? Disney stuff. So
and we do see a lot of like Subway ads for Wendy's later on in the movie, and we do see that she works a lot with kids, so maybe that has something to do with.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
she's always going to visit the kiddie wing, as they would call it on Dark Place.
Yeah, she's got the one little boy that she's always playing with and. Yeah, and cutting up with. No, I didn't notice that, but that's a great pickup. So I noticed that living room is so like 70s shag red too. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's not on purpose because he's basically descending into hell when he transforms at that moment.
I almost feel like John Landis has to be like a closet Man City fan with how often they play Blue Moon in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Landis is just like he just breaks out his 45s anytime he makes a movie. And we talked about the soundtrack in Blues Brothers, and I know Aykroyd and Belushi had a lot to do with that, but Landis is a mark for all that doo-wop era kind of music. And then what would have been popular, around the same time, CCR was contemporary at that moment.
Mm.
I appreciate how on the nose the needle drops are in this movie. Just punch me in the face with werewolf songs, and it's just a shame that like Warren Zevon wouldn't put out Werewolves of London until after this movie, probably because of this movie.
I was going to say, I imagine because of
they
this
had
movie,
just like commissioned him to do that song at the end of this movie, it would just be like top notch to me.
Yeah.
It'd be real pretty. Just remind me at the end when I'm doing my summary to talk about needle drops, because I got thoughts that don't relate directly to this movie, but to its lineage. And we'll come back to that. But no, the first transformation, though, is astounding. And I'll say this, too, and there's an era of movies that did this in the late 70s to the early 80s, and then we just stopped all of it. And now it only happens when Jude Law is having sexy chest. But male nudity out of nowhere, like there's a ton of it in this movie. Like there is a lot of it in this movie.
It's making a comeback, I think. But
on like HBO, they have to show a lot of penises apparently.
Yeah, Game of Thrones. Well,
not what I meant, but yeah.
And the Swedish Santa movies that we've talked about, Ron.
Yeah, Rare Exports is a real reindeer sausage fest. But no, it's. I think a lot of the nudity, especially in this movie, is going to show how vulnerable he is.
Yeah.
During these transformation moments, and then after these transformation moments, because it's like, the scene in the park after his first transformation is funny. It's really funny to me. It remains one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Is the balloon bandit or whatever. Specifically in the first transformation, it is so much scarier because he's naked. It feels like there's nowhere he can hide from this. There's no way he can hide this. And I feel like a lot of it is thumbs way up to Rick Baker, as we've said, and we will continue to say, for making this look great, and thumbs way up for David Naughton for selling the hell out of the transformation scenes. But the fact that he's naked and there are no, like, you can't, there's a lot of parts in the movie where you can't hide, like, oh, well, he's clearly hiding pneumatic tubes under his sleeves to make his hands grow real big and creepy or whatever, and make his face bulge out. They've taped some stuff under his hat. There's not a way for them to hide it, and that makes it all the more visceral, because it's to me the closest thing I can compare it to would be especially the Cronenberg Fly, because it's like, oh, you want to see some scary stuff? You want some horror? How about some body horror? Look at this guy's weird hands.
Yeah.
Look at his knees disjointed in the wrong places, and his feet get all weird. It's incredible.
Yeah. The spine, watching that kind of, poke up, that was the best. That was the best part to me. When the hand got long, I think that was one of the first parts. I was like, this is weird. But then it all came together and I was into it. I do too like that they gave context for why he was ripping his clothes off. I think he yelled that he was burning up.
Yeah, it was hot.
Yeah. And instead of just ripping his clothes off for no reason, which I feel wouldn't be uncommon, but no, it would be uncommon for him to rip his clothes off for no reason. But to just see someone do that in a movie, I appreciated the context. That's all.
Yeah, no, it all makes sense. That's what I was saying. Like, it's just so striking. And, and then when he goes on the rampage, it's, there's like, I think the three homeless people that show up in the theater, like that got cut. I haven't ever seen a scene of it, but it must have been a heck of an attack on the guys, warming themselves up by the fire or whatever, down by Gotham Harbor or whatever they're doing there. But no, I think the funniest bit is he wakes up in that wolf pen in the morning and they're looking at him like, well, Phil, you had a hell of a night, or whatever. Like they're just like like the other wolf is looking at the other one like, just stay away from it. Just stay away from it. We don't mess with those. So, those hybrids.
Also, the things actors will do. He was really naked, really laying in hay.
Yeah, that looks awful.
Can't have been comfortable.
No, that was not a good day. But no, but you have this horrific scene again, then punctuated by great comedy. Like you said, Ron, the scene with the little boy that tried to get the balloon so he can hide and steal the lady's coat. The man on the tube is looking at him like, what are you doing? Just all this uncomfortable stuff that's going on. But I was blown away by it. But then I think it's neat how when he gets back to the apartment finally and he's changing clothes, like he's jacked. He's just it is like the way Jeff Goldblum plays the Fly in The Fly, where he just gets all powered up, and he's just constantly on like this sugar rush or something.
Yeah, I mean, he has his full belly for the first time in a month, so he probably feels very energetic.
Right, yeah, because he doesn't eat anything else. He's never hungry except just that, he ate all these people or parts of them, you assume, during the night. And that's, we get more Griffin Dunn coming back. And I love how, like, even as a ghost, he's rotting away. It's like wherever his body is, they just threw it in a box. They didn't do any work on him. He's just turning into a Muppet, slowly, a horrific Muppet or Crypt Keeper, as it were. But he keeps coming back to go, I told you, David, you can't do this.
He's turning into the zombie on the table from Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, very good, very good. So,
what do you call a talking meatloaf? That's what it was.
I laughed so hard when he said, "I'm sorry, I called you a meatloaf."
It was so great.
I'm sorry, I called you a meatloaf. It's the way he says it too. It's, but again, it's that lived-in relationship you talked about. That's what makes it fun. But I like the fact though that he's confused. Like he doesn't know what he has done or whatever. And we really talk about it with the Jack character and stuff. But what do you make of the little trope that they give it there, that things that are, or people that are killed by the werewolf are stuck in limbo until the werewolf is dead? Like that gives you a ticking clock, like a reason to, you can't just cage yourself up. You have to, kill yourself.
Yeah. And it gives the werewolf a reason to want to die because this is his best friend that he killed. And there's all these other innocent people that he goes on to kill. And I feel like, being a New York Jewish boy, he's going to have a lot of guilt anyway. Just because it seems like everybody from an ethnic subculture in New York carries around a lot of guilt, be it Jewish, Irish, or Italian. And so I feel like that's a big part of him. Like that's a big part of his reason to want to kill himself, even after he starts to enjoy the sensation of being a wolf, enjoy the feeling of fullness. And I feel like it has to be horrifying in order for it to affect him. And I feel like he's got to feel guilty about it.
I mean, clearly he does, because of the way that he kind of goes off the deep end and he runs up to that Bobby and he starts, hurling out insults, doing everything he can to try to get arrested because he's trying to get away from Alex. He's afraid something's going to happen. And
I laughed loud at that scene. I laughed so much because it just, when he just starts cursing, just yelling curse words, I just
What did he say? The queen is a man or something?
Yeah, like all these slurs.
It's just like the most ridiculous stuff.
To me, the best part is when he's just like yelling like shit,
swear words.
Yeah, he's gonna get the verbal morality statute machine over the side, because he's just they're like, "Oh, break it up now." The comments like so like it's so British too. It's just like whatever.
And this is Trafalgar Square, which is where people will just go and hang out by the plinths. People will go and just start talking in public. Like they'll bring a little box and stand up on it and just start orating. And it's very much a place for because I've been there. Lizzie, you've probably been there too.
Yeah.
It's very much a place where all the weirdos get crazy and all the street performers hang out.
It sounds like the free speech zone on campus, y'all.
It hasn't changed much.
No, it is not. It looks exactly the same as it did, except there's more weirdos now than there were in the 80s. And probably more werewolves.
I mean, I'm watching this and I feel like I'm seeing like places that years later I'd watch Tom Hanks run across in one of those Da Vinci movies or something. It's a famous place. I've seen a lot of movies. The Muppets hung out there during the Great Muppet Caper. Great flick, by the way. But yeah, I mean, it's something that would be iconic that everyone would know. But I get the comedy of it. It's just he's being so ridiculous that he can't get anybody to listen to him, and he gets away from Alex. And we get like a real sweet moment when he calls back home. And his parents are gone to do something with his brother. He gets to talk to his kid sister, and basically tell her goodbye because he knows he's done at that point. And I did have a question for y'all. I'm like, okay, so his parents went to his best friend's funeral. Neither one of them flew over there to see if he was all right. Like, really? That's the one part I'm like I'm pretty sure mom would have been on a plane.
I don't know. Maybe cross-country travel was daunting. And the embassy guy reached out to them and probably was like, he's good. The best thing you can do is just let him stay here and recover. The guy who played the embassy guy, I don't know if he actually had a name in the movie.
He does, but it doesn't matter.
Is he sounds like Kermit the Frog.
He's the voice of Fozzie the Bear and Miss Piggy.
Is he? That's what it is. Yeah, okay. And then shortly after, they played a scene from the Muppets in like the. So I was wondering about that. Okay. See, I thought one of you guys would know.
Yeah. Total. Frank Oz does a lot of walk-ons in tons of movies, but particularly Landis movies and all that stuff. He was the cop in Blues Brothers when they're letting Jake out.
Yeah, he gets to deliver the one prophylactic used soiled line.
Yeah, and then he's also the cop in the booking scene in Trading Places when Lewis is getting
that's right.
Him. It's an opera. He does that line. So that's what I know Frank Oz from. He's all the great work he's done. He's also the voice of Yoda. I guess we should mention the thing he's probably most famous for. But
I don't know. Fozzie the Bear is pretty famous.
Fozzie, Yoda, yeah, it's a pretty. Fozzie's never been CGI rendered like a piece of plastic in a movie, as far as I know. So
Not yet.
I was just about to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Although if you watch the new Muppet Babies series that they did, he's pretty creepily CGI'd in that.
Okay, see, they need to leave things alone. Stop wrecking my childhood. No, I love how all of that. He has had that sweet moment there, and then he breaks out the Swiss Army knife. And my wife was like, "You can't, cut anything off of that." I was like, "Oh, contraire, mon frere. There's a guy that sawed his friggin' arm off with one of those that had it caught in the rock in 127 hours. So yes, you can. He just couldn't do it."
If it's sharp enough, you don't got to do much. But he's going across the tracks. Everybody knows you got to go down the street.
Yeah,
you got to do the T. Like, you can't. Yeah, he was doing it wrong. But
give him a break. He's never tried it before that we know.
True.
I also feel like as a city boy, like that's the best knife he can get access to in New York.
Come on, like he'd have a switchblade.
Come on, not a nice kid who goes to NYU. Are you kidding? He's from the suburbs.
Oh, he would have had one just to be cool. That's what I mean. Like,
he had a switchblade
that or a
butterfly
butterfly
cool.
knife.
Come on.
Okay, true.
Yeah.
If he whipped out a butterfly knife, that'd have been fun.
He pulls out the Rambo special that you can take on airplanes.
Yeah. While we're talking about this, Ron, as the resident werewolf expert, I have a question for you, and maybe it's answered in this movie, but I don't think it is. Yeah. So they say a few times that the line has to end in order for all of these ghosts to leave this, like, their middle ground or whatever, wherever they're walking. But then they say a few times that he specifically has to kill himself, but he doesn't kill himself. So my question is, does he just have to die, or does he specifically have to kill himself in order for the line to end?
He just has to die, but the Griffin Dunn character is trying to get him to kill himself before he kills anyone else. They're wanting him to kill himself before the next full moon.
Okay.
See, I had a question, and they don't answer it in this movie, but my thought was, like, if he tried to kill himself, would it be like the Incredible Hulk and the wolf would just come out anyway at that moment to keep him from doing it?
We'll never know.
No, this one is the cursed type werewolf. It's not the
Werewolf on Demand.
Werewolf on Demand. Yeah, he didn't pay for that upgrade package, so he just gets the
Werewolf on Demand of the Twilight series is what I, in my head, am referencing.
Gotcha.
Right
No,
now.
this is the one with commercials.
There we go. Yeah.
This is the one you get 3 free articles a month.
Right. There you go. Otherwise, it's subscription prices, kids. But yeah, no, I did like that though, because he knows it's going to go bad.
Well, just think about one of the things that they talk about is he says, "Don't I need a silver bullet to do that?" And then Griffin Dunn just kind of scoffs at him, like,
Yeah.
"Be serious."
I love that part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another funny part. But it also is, it doesn't take anything special to kill the werewolf. They just a bunch of guys with shotguns gunned down the original one. I mean, and just a bunch of police with rifles gunned this one down. So it spoiler for the end of the movie. That's a 41-year-old movie. It doesn't seem to make him any more invulnerable than a normal person would be. It just gives him the bestial nature of the werewolf, and obviously the teeth and the claws and the hunger. So I don't think there's any reason for him to kill himself other than the fact that they want him to not add to their number of revenants.
Okay. That makes sense.
So there's a lot of details in this movie, like little things. Lindsay, you caught all the Disney tchotchkes. We've talked about like the color, the needle drop. I don't think there's any bit of detail that I was more impressed with than the fact that John Landis shot a fake porno that had a storyline to it for the third act of this movie, because he winds up in the porno theater to See You Next Wednesday, which I chuckled out loud.
I laughed a lot at that too. That was great.
So, I mean, people are getting it on. The guy breaks in. He's like, "I told you not to do that anymore. Who are you?" "Oh, sorry, wrong flat." And he just walks out the door. It's like, I mean, he scripted that. Like, it just blows my mind. I'm like, I mean, a lesser movie wouldn't bother to have that going on. It would just be something on the screen, but it's like its own subplot. Like, I feel like that movie probably has its own website, that people talk about it and stuff in.
It's probably been, I'm sure there's a spinoff somewhere.
Well, Landis has See You Next Wednesday in every movie. And every time See You Next Wednesday is in there, it's a different kind of movie. But to me, that those scenes mostly feel like outtakes from Kentucky Fried Movie or Amazon Women on the Moon. It's like, that's right. Yeah. Right. That's right there next to No Soul and Danger Seekers and A Fistful of Yen and all those things. It's like,
it's all that stuff. It's the kind of aside jokes in like Airplane and all that. It's that same kind of stuff. It's just wacky.
There are some bits that feel like they're directly lifted from Kentucky Fried Movie, specifically like the Catholic High School Girls in Trouble opening segment, where it's just a riff of these, Sam Arkoff B movies, women in prison flicks and that kind of stuff. So if there's one thing Landis has shown the capability of doing, it's to take a movie genre and distill it down to a thing that's like a minute long and that is completely absurdist and funny.
It's like the fake movie trailers in Grindhouse and all that stuff, like those kind of things.
Or the fake movie trailers from Tropic Thunder.
Right, yeah, any of that kind of stuff. Like I thought it was hilarious. That was just me.
Oh no, those were really funny, and it's a nice counterpoint to how they do the similar setup in The Howling, which we will have to talk about The Howling at some point. Howling 1 and Howling 7, but
just bookend it that way. Yeah. I will say this about that is it's juxtaposed with now completely Crypt Keeper puppet Jack with Griffin Dunn voicing him. But there's another little bit of detail in there. He doesn't have any lips anymore. So when Griffin Dunn talks, he can't do the things that he got have lips for. I thought that
so
was really
how does he say schmuck?
At some point he's messing with his rotten face, and I feel like maybe he's like using his hand to form the word.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Okay. That I could see that. See, again, it's just the little things like that. Yeah. I'll have to go back and rewatch this now because I want to see the Disney tchotchkes and all this other stuff. So it's
him saying schmuck was my big question because he didn't have lips, and I was like, that's a really hard word to say without lips, I imagine.
Right, like how can you do that? But it's funny to watch that go down, and you see David trying to muster courage, do something or whatever, but it's played for laughs because he is in a porno theater and he's like sweating and gyrating around, and this guy walks up to him like, "Excuse me, sir, I'm trying to have a good pull over here and you're distracting me," or whatever, and he obviously is turning into a werewolf, but of all places where you would interrupt somebody, maybe that setting wouldn't be the one. I don't know. I don't know that I want to make eye contact in that theater. Not that I've been in any. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I don't think those have existed for most of our life.
I mean, no, this is like, I don't think this happens anymore. But
yeah,
and the last time I remember it happened was like Paul Rubens. No, Fred Willard happened after that.
Yeah.
Fred Willard was in the 2000s, I believe.
So they must be somewhere, but it does set up a great end scene, and that whole. Like the entire, I called it the Smokey and the Banditing of Piccadilly Circus, but it could be Blues Brothers, any kind of car wreck travesty. All of that is amazing. And it's really when they cut the wolf really loose, and that looks awesome. Like I am just blown away by that whole 5-minute action sequence.
To me, it was like if Blues Brothers car crashes were punctuated by like Blood on the Highway, or one of those drivers ed scare films, because it wasn't just people getting hit by cars crashing. It was people getting hit by cars and pulverized. And a guy got his head run over and he burst like a bag full of soup.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he rips that cop's head off and it just rolls like a bowling ball.
You had people like getting pinned in between cars. There was just carnage everywhere in the best way, of course.
It was pure chaos.
Yes, it was pure chaos.
I think, and then what that's supposed to do, I think, is let us know, like, David needs to die. Evil needs to die tonight because it can't control itself. Like, there's no way he ever will be able to. He's got to go. He's got to go.
And it's not even anything he's doing. It's that he's such an interruption to the natural world that, like, he's killing people without even. He's killing people just by like walking down the street. Yeah. And he's not even doing anything. People are just like gawking at the werewolf and like running over cops.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't get a full body count, but there's a lot of people that get killed in this scene. Like it's gory and it goes on and on.
There are definitely more people killed by cars than there are by the werewolf, for sure.
Right.
And it's more of that Landis balance between the horror and comedy, because as you're like, oh, the car crashes, this is fun. People are freaking out and yelling and running away, and then it's like, oh, that guy just got run over by a bus. Oh, that guy's head just got ripped off, and it's like you're chuckling, and then like something terrible happens. They're like, oh, that guy got pinned between two cars, and now he's gonna be in a wheelchair because he's got no legs from the thigh down. It's like you're kind of chuckling, but you're also very uncomfortable.
Well, don't they say like fear and laughter are sort of in the same emotional band? They're not that far apart from one another anyway. So when you mix them together, it does create that mixed emotion.
Yeah. I mean, I've laughed scared before. I think a lot of people do. It's just a natural, because you're full of adrenaline, and laughing is getting that oxygen into your lungs to help kind of clear that out.
You say that, Lindsay, and I'm sitting here chuckling myself, because that is my wife's reaction to anything that's supposed to be, quote, scary, is she will just cackle at it and like hysterically, like she just thinks it's funny. And so, yeah, like the first time I showed that woman The Exorcist, she laughed the whole time through it. I don't know that she was actually scared by it or she thought it was funny, but
maybe both.
Yeah, but it could have been a little of both. But yeah.
Did she even laugh at the Spinal Tap scene? Because that's the one that gets me.
Yeah, well, that was an don't talk about that. But yeah, that was an ick factor. But I love how the werewolf goes down the alley because it's trying to get away from that looks like a mess over there. I don't need to be involved in that anymore. And Alex is boy, the cops, man, like that's a great barricade. She just runs right through them, not even there. And but I do love how she pauses him, and they do that. It's just like a subtle little thing. This is again why practical effects are so awesome, because there's light actually on things. She tells him, "David, I love you," and like it's like his face relaxes for like 1 second, and it's almost like humanity gets just one last second to stop the wolf, and then when it lunges at her is when they gun him down.
Yeah, you see that little twinkle in his eye or glint in his eye that there's still that he understands somewhere, even as a werewolf. He can hear her.
Well, and it's the traditional monster movie ending, King Kong's got to die. Yeah. 'Twas beauty killed the beast. And they even make they mentioned it earlier in the movie that someone asked, does it have to be someone who loves you that has to kill the werewolf? And indirectly, she is one of the reasons why he dies, because he does make that lunge at her, because she does follow him down, and the police feel like they have to act before they can, get the tranquilizer guns out or whatever. But yeah, it's a very kind of bittersweet ending because they do establish that this relationship has grown into something more than I think either one of them expected. And it's a very kind of sweet moment, but it's that lulls you in that you think, oh, it's going to be nice. It's going to be the monster's going to soften, and the police are probably going to kill it anyway. We get the King Kong ending, but no, it's still the werewolf, and it still is a killing machine.
Yeah. But I love how they cut away from him on the ground to her sobbing, then back to him on the ground. So you get one last shot of naked David, bloody, gunshot wounds, and then smash cut, blue moon. And I was like, wow, like that just hits right in the face. It's like, wow, that was a choice.
I did laugh at that. Like that was my immediate reaction to the smash cut and credits. And I just was like, oh, awesome. I guess I'll work now. The movie's over. So
well, as the movie ends, so ends the podcast. We're getting to the point of the show where we give our final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. And Jay, what are your thoughts on American Werewolf in London?
My biggest thought is, and I thought this 5 years ago when I finally watched it, was like, I'm mad that it took me that long to finally get around to seeing this one, because I wish this movie had been in my head and life a lot longer, because it's so much fun. And we've talked about all the things that work about it, and that the effects, it still holds up and all of that stuff, but it's just fun. It's just a fun movie. It doesn't ask a lot of you. You can nitpick and ask a ton of questions if you want, but you don't really need to. You can just kind of sit there and let it roll, and then smash cut right into a 45 and you're done. But y'all, I went whole hog with this. I not only watched this one again because it's on Peacock as time of recording here, but its sequel, American Werewolf in Paris, is also on Peacock. And I decided I had 94 minutes to burn, and I just had to know. And I could spend another hour talking about that, but all the needle drops in this that are so good. Imagine if you replace those with late 90s post grunge pop rock sludge, Bush and Lit and all that kind of stuff. In a movie with Tom Everett Scott and poor Julie Delpy and a lot of bad CGI like that. It does not have a great legacy. And maybe Landis himself said it's a bad move, but
maybe save a little bit of that for our inevitable American Werewolf in Paris episode.
I mean, I think we're going to have to come back to it someday, because I need both of you to suffer through that with me.
For sure.
I did for this, but I wanted to, just because I wanted to see, like, where would you pick it up from, and where they pick it up from is insane. But this movie by itself, ton of fun, absolute certified classic. For sure. I'm going to give it the whole thing. I'll give it an extra large popcorn. I think it was a blast, and it's a real good ride. So yeah, 2 thumbs, extra large. Definitely watch it.
Lindsey?
I liked it. It was really good. I It's not an extra large for me. It's not a large for me, but it's a good medium. I'll put it on my rewatch for sure. I would rewatch it again, especially, I don't know, anytime, especially if it's still available on a streaming network that I have. I mean, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But like a good medium popcorn. There's butter, there's salt. It's satisfying. It's a night after a good werewolf kill popcorn.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're
in a good mood after.
That scares both of us.
You're in a good mood after.
As for me, I'm going to split the difference between the two of you, and I'm going to go with a large popcorn. Horror comedy is, to me, one of the hardest things for anyone to pull off, and this movie pulls it off. Like, the amount of bad horror comedies I've seen versus the amount of good horror comedies I've seen, it's like the good horror comedies are werewolves, and the bad horror comedies are all the people that get murdered by werewolves. It's a real big imbalance there. This is one of the ones that works, and I feel like this is the reason why you got a lot of those horror comedies in the 80s. I feel like if it wasn't for this being successful, you wouldn't have had Fright Night. Because what's Fright Night? It's like American Vampire in Calabasas or wherever that's supposed to take place.
Suburbia.
Yeah. Or you wouldn't have The Lost Boys. You wouldn't have a lot of things that feel like they're somehow slightly related to this. So, like I said, split the difference, and I'm going to do a large popcorn. And that about wraps it up for us here. As always, you can follow the show's social media at FilmstripPod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff. There you will find announcements about upcoming shows and a link to our Letterboxd page, which contains our entire list of reviews, all 300-something of them. There's a lot. Go to filmstrippodcast.com to check out our Anchor.fm distribution site, where you can find us on your podcast platform of choice, Apple, Spotify, Google, etc. Please share the show, and if you can, leave us a positive review, as it helps other people find us out. For Jay and Lindsay, I'm Ron. Thank you for listening to Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.